Hi everyone, my name's Jen. I'm an author and a book reviewer, and I'm here today with a rather epic 2024 wrap-up. Primarily a reading wrap-up, but there will be a few elements to this video. Firstly, I want to very briefly chat about 2024 as a year personally for me. Then I want to talk about all the books I read in 2024 because I didn't do many wrap-ups over the course of last year, and I would like to not rectify that but kind of compensate for that, I suppose. And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge both to me and to the books because it's team effort, not just about how well I can remember them, but also how much of an impact they had, like what work did they do. Then I asked you for questions about my reading year, and you sent me lots of questions like what was my best or favourite translated book, what was the worst book I read, etc. So I will answer those questions, and then at the end I thought I would throw in some other recommendations of favourite films and TV shows that I watched in 2024 as well. So I think it's going to be a long one. Please do pull up a seat, grab yourself a cup of tea if you haven't done so already. I am still recovering from a chest infection, so please do excuse the croaky voice. Let's pretend that's not there. So 2024 as a year, it was my 10th year on BookTube, and a very different year because I started out the year heavily pregnant, and then I had a baby at the beginning of March, took a couple of months off, and then came back to BookTube over the course of 2024. I used to upload videos every Sunday, and it would be lovely if I could still do that, but obviously I can't. But I hope that you have been pleased, happy with the content that I have been able to put out. I've really put a lot of effort into it and continuing to make long form content because that's what I enjoy doing, and I know it's what you enjoy watching. So still making the Booker Prize longlist video, for instance, and quite a few other things besides. So I hope to continue that, uploading every couple of weeks into 2025 and throughout. I have lots of videos in the works at the moment. So 2024 was really obviously a huge transition into motherhood, and then trying to figure out how to balance parenthood and work as a freelancer, and that will continue to be something that I have to navigate going forward. And yeah, I'm sure there will be new challenges all the time, but I kept uploading to YouTube. I kept writing for Toast, working for the Society of Authors, working for Inclusive Books for Children. In fact, I was a judge for their book awards, which are still ongoing, and we'll be announcing the winners in February. If you want to find out about that, I will link it in the description box down below. And then the last work related thing that I did in 2024 was work on a couple of books. So I wrote a book called Audrey Fry is a Spy, which is illustrated by David Ortu. This is a Collins Big Cat reader. It's primarily for 6 to 7 year olds, and it's about a girl called Audrey Fry who happens to have alopecia and is also a spy. That was a lot of fun, but the main writing thing that I was doing in 2024 and for several years prior to that actually was working on a book called Owning It, which is coming out in April. It's being published by Faber. I have edited this book along with James and Lucy Catchpole, and it's a book that we wished we had had when we were kids. So in 2021, I chaired an event with James online where we were talking about his book, What Happened to You, which is a picture book, very autobiographical, about a boy who happens to have one leg and how annoyed he is at the playground because kids and adults keep asking him, what happened to you? And he just wants to play pirates. Thank you very much. And we were talking about how there really weren't books for kids by disabled authors when we were younger, and how we wished there were more of those. And then we were remembered that we are both disabled authors, and maybe there is something we can do about that, not for our younger selves because we are not time travelers, but for current generations. So we decided to call upon other disabled writers. So this is a book with 22 contributors, including ourselves, and it's a series of essays, pieces, memories, people writing about their childhoods, about school life, about family life, about friends, food, loads of different things. Some pieces are full of disability joy, some are pieces that discuss ableism, and we are so very, very proud of it. I will talk more about it near a release date. It is primarily for middle grade, so that is for 8 to 13 year olds, but I mean, I would read it now. I have read it because I have read everyone's pieces. I think it is, well, I hope it is going to be a really rich resource for people and also a comfort. So if that appeals, pre-order links are in the description box. I will also link my Instagram post, which has more about the contributors, etc. So you can go find out who's part of it. But yes, very proud of this project coming out in April. that took up a lot of 2024. Okay, so reading stats. Normally I have loads of stats to share with you because I have my own spreadsheet where I record if a book is translated, whether, what else do I record? When I purchased it, I think, so how long it's been on my shelves, whether the author is a person of colour, whether they are disabled. I just, things that I like to personally keep track of in my reading, but I didn't do that in 2024. So I just have some very basic stats that I've pulled from Storygraph. I will link my Storygraph in the description box down below. So in 2024, I read 107 books. Now, wait a second, because that sounds like a lot for someone who had a baby. A lot of those are books that I read for the Inclusive Books for Children project. So those are picture books, etc. So very short books. So 107 books, but that worked out as 16,500 words, which I think is just about half of what I read the year before, I think, page count wise. So 5% of that was nonfiction, 95% was fiction. I had 8 DNFs on top of those books that I've mentioned, and I listened to 15% on audio and 85% I read in print. If you take out the picture books, the percentage of audio of books that I read for pleasure was much higher. Obviously, I didn't read any of the picture books in audiobook form. And if you take out the picture books, I read 58 books for myself. So for pleasure outside of work. And if I had included the books that I had read with my daughter, we could add another 100 on. So there are lots of different elements to this, but I think the key figure is 58 books of ones that I chose to read in my spare time. My most read authors were John Wyndham, Judith Kerr, Yuki Inoue, and the mood map always makes me laugh on Storygraph. So it maps your reading mood throughout the year, and this is it here. And as you can see, I think it's in July and August, the mood dips a lot. And that's because that's when I read the Booker Prize longlist. And those books often are depressing as hell. So my mood definitely lowered reading-wise during those months. But otherwise, I think it was, I'm not looking at it right this second when I'm filming this, but I think it was pretty even the rest of the time. So I don't keep every book that I read. I keep books that I potentially would like to reread, or I think I'm going to speak about a lot on this channel, or that I would maybe like to recommend to other people, loan to people, etc. Any books that I didn't enjoy or don't think I will reread, I pass on to other people. Every month I put a box of books outside our house, text the street WhatsApp group, and people come and take them, which is a very wholesome and lovely thing. So I have 3 piles of books on the floor next to me of all the books I read last year, but these are not all the books I read last year because some of them aren't here because I got rid of them. So I'm going to go through the ones that I have first and talk to you about them. Then I'm going to go through my Storygraph and remind myself of the ones that I parted ways with and briefly tell you about them. I'm only going to be doing a rundown. I'm going to be giving you, or at least I plan to give you, a couple of sentences for each book. Otherwise, we will be here for days. And I'm not going to talk to you about the books I read for work for Inclusive Books for Children. And I'm not going to talk to you about picture books that I read with my daughter, but I will talk to you about a couple of picture books I bought for myself, because I've always done that, will continue to do that. I was going to say because I'm a children's author, but I think I would do that anyway, because I think some picture books just transcend, age ranges and are for everybody. Okay. Shall we begin? I've put them in chronological order. I feel quite organised. Let's go. The first book I have to talk to you about is actually one I think I talked about in my 2023 wrap-up video, because I read it at the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, and I thought if I don't talk to you about it then, I will forget about it. But the reason I want to mention it again here, and I actually haven't included it as a number or in the stats, is because I recently watched the film of this, so I thought I would let you know what I thought, because many of you asked when I read it if I was going to see the film. So this is Strangers by Tachi Yamada, which is translated from the Japanese by Wayne P. Lammers. This is about a man who lives in an apartment block that is seemingly abandoned apart from one other person who lives there, a woman called Kai, who comes to visit him. And then one day he is out and he sees a man who looks exactly like his long dead father, starts talking to him, and the man invites him back to his house where he is living with a woman who looks exactly like his long dead mother. I enjoyed reading this. I then watched the film, which is All of Us Strangers, with Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal. it's so different, and there are things that I prefer about each of them. So I prefer that this book is Japanese, is set in Japan, and I really love that the main character is a scriptwriter. Andrew Scott's character is also a scriptwriter in All of Us Strangers, but it's more of a big deal in the book because the whole point of the book and him being a scriptwriter is that he is writing his own reality, and you're not sure where that ends and his real life begins, and everything becomes really blurred. They didn't seem to make use of that in the film, which I found slightly puzzling. But the film is queer, so instead of him running into a woman, he runs into a man who's Paul Mescal, and they start up a relationship, and I much preferred that element of the film. I don't think that either of them are perfect. I would recommend them both, but for different reasons. I found this hauntingly beautiful. I found the film just desperately sad, but I think that that's kind of the point of the film, I suppose. But having read the book, I think the film didn't have as strong an impact as it would have done if I had gone into it having not read the book. So that's my thoughts on that and the adaptation. Then I read A Suspension of Mercy by Patricia Highsmith. This was a lot of fun. This is about a man who, again, is a writer, and he writes about what it would be like to kill his wife because he doesn't get on with her, and then one day his wife disappears, the police turn up, they hear that he's been writing these things for a production that he's doing about murdering his wife, and they are therefore very suspicious of him. Again, you don't really know what's real and what he's writing and the stories that he's coming up with. I thought it was deliciously creepy, and I would very much recommend it. Speaking of deliciously creepy, I then read Pet by Catherine Chidgey, which is a split time novel, partly set in the 80s and partly set in the near modern day. A woman called Justine, yes, who is looking back on her childhood, and a teacher that she used to love, who then becomes tangled up in her personal life. This teacher makes all of the children in her class adore her by giving them tasks that are extracurricular, to like go to the pharmacy to pick up drugs that she needs, prescription drugs, and getting them to clean her car, for instance. And it means that they feel very important, and she just manipulates these children. And as an adult reading it, you can see that that's not okay, but these children think it's brilliant because they want to be treated like adults. It goes in a very interesting direction. The ending is punchy and I thought about this book all year and recommended it to so many people. I would say if you love Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Heller, you will love this. It has that same biting quality to it. Then I read a non-fiction book, which is A Woman in the Polar Night by Christian Ritter, which is translated from the German by Jane de Grasse. And this is a book that was written in the 1930s about Christiane writing about how she decided to go and stay with her husband in Svalbard and travel the Arctic Circle with him. They were living in the middle of nowhere. Their nearest neighbour was 60 miles away across the snow, which her husband said was very local and very convenient, and he wasn't being ironic about it. And she was just living in the most dire circumstances and hadn't really known what she was getting herself into before she got there. She packed all kinds of comforting things before leaving, then got a letter from her husband saying that she couldn't bring any luggage at all and she had to leave it all behind. There's a haunting element to this in that she has left Austria to go to Svalbard and she has no idea of what's going on in Europe on the lead up to the Second World War. She's so isolated out there with her husband, and there's deep eeriness to that, but the writing in this is beautiful. If you like Sarah Moss's Names for the Sea, you will really enjoy this one. Then I read Foster by Claire Keegan, which is a very short novel about a young girl who's sent to stay with a couple who live on a farm because her family are having another baby and they don't have enough money to look after her at the same time. She hasn't always felt loved in her home, and she ends up feeling very loved at this new home that she goes to, and that will really make your heart ache. Then I read The Pachinko Parlour by Eliza Shua-Dusapan, which is translated from the French by Anissa Abbas-Higgins. I loved this book so much, and I was so pleased because I read her debut Winter in Sokjo a couple of years ago. It was a cover by Daunt Books, just published things so beautifully, and I didn't love it, but everyone else apart from me seems to have loved it. I don't know why I didn't get on with it. I don't know if it was because it had quite a heavy romance element to it and that's not always my cup of tea, but I just was not wowed by it at all. But then this may also have been another cover buy, and I thought I would give her another go, and I'm so pleased that I did. This is about a woman called Claire who goes to Tokyo to stay with her Korean grandparents, who she would like to travel back to Korea with. So she's trying to persuade them to do that. And while she's there, she's also teaching French to a young Japanese girl called Miko. It's a very, very quiet novel. There's a lot of dampness in the book. It's always raining. The colour blue is mentioned a lot. It's very heavy with grief and all of these unspoken things, which makes the novel feel really claustrophobic. That's where it really shines, actually. It's just hinting at all of the things that the characters are not saying. If you would like quite a poignant, understated novel, then this is one that I would push into your hands. Next, I read Paradise Rot by Jenny Haval, which is a Norwegian novel translated by Mayim Idris. This is about a woman who goes to university and ends up living with someone in this house that is full of mold. Mushrooms are growing on the walls and everything just feels a little bit dirty, and she kind of likes that. It's a really get under your skin, you're not sure why kind of novel. I don't really know how to explain it apart from that. I would say if you like a Tessa Marshfeld, then you will really enjoy this one. Then I read Chucky by John Wyndham, which isn't my favourite John Wyndham, really, and I haven't remembered it that well. In fact, I may pass this on to somebody else because I don't think I'll be rereading it. But it is about a boy called Matthew who says that he's got a boy called Chucky who is telling him to do things. And it's about how his family react to that and the embarrassment that they have. They think that maybe psychologically there is something wrong with Matthew, but then it seems like maybe there's something extraterrestrial instead. Like with most of John Wyndham's novels, there's a really serious element to it. And then also a science fiction, almost absurdist element to it, which means you can't take it too seriously. And I enjoy that about his work, but I read other books by him that I enjoyed more in 2024, which obviously we will get to in a minute. Then I reread The Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Faber. This was my favourite book of the year in 2014, and my first book by Michelle Faber that I'd ever read. It's about a man called Peter who decides to go to the other side of the universe to preach the word of God to an alien life form. That's what he thinks he's doing. That's what he thinks he's been sent there to do. But things are not all as they seem when he gets there. It reminds me of Mary Malone and the Maletha in his Dark Materials. I think that's why I feel so close to those scenes. There's a real cloyingness to this. You can feel the sticky atmosphere of this humid planet. It's like you're wading through it with Peter. And that's, I think, the feeling that I'm left with the most, is this real feel to it. It also feels like you're completely jet lagged when you're reading it too. And that was amplified by the fact that I read this postpartum. It was the first book I read after giving birth to my daughter, and I listened to this on audio during night feeds, and that was a really surreal experience. It had a timelessness to it in so many different ways. I didn't find myself adoring it as much as the first time I read it, but I think that's because the element of suspense of what's going to happen to Peter wasn't there because I had already read it before, so that's not the book's fault at all. And also I read it in such a fragmented way that I don't think that was conducive to loving the book either. I still very much enjoyed it, would very, very much recommend it. Then I read this picture book, which is Mama Car by Lucy Catchpole, illustrated by Karen George. This is about how a wheelchair, as well as being an accessibility tool, is also a safe space for a child, and it's about a mother and a child navigating the home, going on little expeditions or big expeditions with each other and the Mama Car or her wheelchair, and I just thought it was gorgeous. Then I read the Women's Prize shortlist, not the long list this time. Please do forgive me, I literally had a baby the same week that the long list was announced, so I think it's fine. I've only kept 3 of the 6 books, but if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on all of the shortlist, I'll link that vlog in the description box down below. But briefly, Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy is perhaps not a book I would recommend reading at 1 month postpartum, because this is about a woman who is losing her mind because she's exhausted, because she has a young baby and she has a very unhelpful husband, and it is one of the most stressful things I think I've ever read, because she thinks of abandoning her baby, etc. It is intense, but brilliant. I do think that the prose veers into not the sentimental, but maybe just it felt overwritten to me in places, and I could have done without that. But when it was brutally honest and harrowing, it had me. So yes, there is that one. My daughter must have heard me talking about abandoning babies because she suddenly woke up from her nap. It is now the following day. Let us continue. I also enjoyed Enter Ghost by Isabel Hamad, which is about a woman called Sonia who travels from London to Palestine, ends up putting on or being part of a production of Hamlet in the West Bank in Arabic. It's about how we retell, reinvent stories and the lens we tell them through and the power within that. Enjoyed this. Some of it is in script format, which I thought was very effective. And then my favourite from the shortlist was River East, River West by Aubrey Lescure, which is about a teenager called Alva who's really annoyed that her mum is marrying their landlord. It's set in China, and it's about how people project different versions of themselves, how people project wealth and whiteness and chase certain dreams. And this book just felt like a hug to me. I listened to this one, it made me cry several times, and I thought that it was brilliant. After that, I read Private Rights by Julia Armfield, which is another book that feels like you're reading it underwater, like with the Pachinko Parlor and several other books I read this year. I think Paradise Rock would fall into that as well. This is about three sisters and the death of their father, who was an architect, and he spent a lot of his time building homes for very rich people to save them from climate crisis. And now climate crisis has reached nearly its peak, and the city that these sisters are living in is underwater, and a lot of people are still in denial about the world ending. It's kind of like Station 11 meets Our Wives Under the Sea, actually, her previous book. I think it's really a mixture of those two things, also because this has lots of references to King Lear, as does Station 11. So if you enjoy Emily St. John Mandel, I think you will really enjoy that. The writing has such a poetic, hypnotic quality to it. I read Butter by Asako Yuzuki, which is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. This is a book that is definitely flawed, but I found myself thinking about it so much in a similar way to Out by Natsuo Kirino, which I read in 2023 and thought was going to be a 5-star read. Not that I give stars to books, but I thought it was going to be a favourite. And then the end fell apart and I ended up really detesting the ending. This one I felt really did unravel towards the end and lose its way a little bit, but I would like to revisit it at some point. I listened to it on audio. It's narrated brilliantly by Hanako Footman, and it's about a journalist who goes to visit a woman who's been locked up for killing her lovers. She apparently seduced them with food, so she goes into prison to talk to her about food, and this woman gives her lots of restaurant recommendations, so she goes and eats at those places to try and understand this killer better. And it made me so hungry, this book, and I'm not sure what that says about me, but I love the descriptions of Tokyo and I love the descriptions of all the food. I think it's got some interesting discussions on feminism in Japan, but yeah, I think there were too many elements to this book and they unravelled towards the end, which was a bit of a shame, but I would still recommend it. I then reread Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. The reason that I reread a few books last year was because over on Patreon for our book club in 2024, we reread some of my favourite books. I've been wanting to do that for a while, and 2024 seemed like a good year to do that. I loved this one, I think even more upon rereads. This is maybe the third or fourth time I've reread it, I think. It's obviously very, very short, and I'm sure you know what it's about, but if you don't, it's about a man whose wife has died, and he's a Ted Hughes scholar, and grief comes to visit him and his two sons in the form of Ted Hughes's character Crow. It is a cruel presence, but also a comforting presence at the same time. I, for some reason, had this as number 5, I think, on my favourites the year that I read it, which was 2015. I don't know why it wasn't higher. I think it should have been, in retrospect, number 1, but that wasn't how my past self felt, obviously, but it's always a joy to reread things and get even more out of them. Then I read the Booker Prize longlist, and I made a very long reading vlog talking about all of them, so I won't dwell on the titles here, but I will tell you which ones I ended up keeping. I ended up keeping Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle, which wasn't one of my favourites, and I also ended up keeping Orbital by Samantha Harvey as well. I think I would just like to come back to these at some point. I really love the setup of this, which is a series of fights between female boxers, young girls who have all these aspirations and dreams, but it's written by a narrator who knows what they're going to be in the future, and it has a real biting depressing tone to it, actually, because you know they're not going to achieve the things that they want to achieve. And I thought that that was very powerful. And then Orbital by Samantha Harvey, I think is really gorgeous, but like with Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, the writing felt a little overwrought for me at times. So if you really like Claire Kilroy's writing and you haven't read Orbital by Samantha Harvey, you should. I really particularly loved the discussion on viewing, on who is a subject and who is the object of a novel, of a painting. Is the subject the reader, the bystander? I thought that that was the most interesting thing about this book. I loved The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden, which is a Dutch novel but written in English, and I would recommend it for fans of Sarah Waters, I think. Historical fiction set in the 1950s about siblings, but also is queer as well, and has this twist that I didn't see coming, but I think if you're Dutch, you will see it coming. It's just not something that is discussed as much, I think, in the UK. Without wanting to sound too cryptic, I just don't want to give things away, but I thought this book was really effective. Deeply admired My Friends by Hisham Attar, still furious that this one didn't make the shortlist, quite frankly. And then Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood, I think was my favourite from this year's Booker longlist. It creeped me out a lot. It reminded me a lot, actually, of The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Not subject matter wise, but the way that it's written in diary format and holds quite a lot of things back because of that format, because the writer of the diary wouldn't use exposition because she knows what she's talking about. She knows lots of personal information about herself and her past, and she doesn't explain that to you because you as a reader are not supposed to be reading this diary. So you're having to piece together a lot of things, and that gives the book this haunted quality that I really enjoyed. It also had a mouse plague in it, which I will forever remember, especially because that was compounded by the fact that we then had a few mice visitors of our own this autumn, which I mean, they're cute, but not in my house, thank you very much. And I just kept thinking, oh my god, there's going to be thousands soon, because I'd read that book. Obviously there wasn't thousands, but oh no, images of mice crawling all over. No, let's not talk about it. Okay, let's not talk about it. Let's actually, speaking of mice, a couple of picture books that I read and I've spoken about quite a bit on this channel, actually, so won't dwell. We've got Mouse as Wood by Alice Melvin and Mouse on the River, also by Alice Melvin. The most gorgeous picture books with Lift the Flaps, where you can see into the homes of all the creatures in the wood and then on the river. And I bought these for myself, but have read them with my daughter and have enjoyed reading them alone and also with her. And then I also wanted to recommend X-Fang's books. I bought 2 of those this year. One of them I had to have shipped over from America because it's not released here. This is Dim Sum Palace, which is out here. This is inspired quite heavily by The Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak, about a young girl called Liddy who dreams about going to Dim Sum Palace because she's going there the following day with her family. In real life it's a restaurant, but in her dreams it is this palace where she is accidentally made into a dumpling in the kitchen and is nearly eaten by an empress. It is the right balance of perilous but also funny and lovely. And then the other one, which I got shipped over from Canada, this is We Are Definitely Human, which is very amusing. It is about Mr. and Mrs. Lee, who let 3 extraterrestrials into their house who are definitely human. Their car has broken down, which is their UFO, and they help them. It's very wholesome. And then where are we going to next? Oh, this was a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun. In September, one of my most anticipated releases came out, which was Think Again by Jacqueline Wilson. This is the follow-on to her Girls series, which I read so many times over and over and over and over again when I was a young teen, and actually have revisited in my 20s, maybe even my 30s as well, I can't really remember. I was so nervous about this because I love the original books so much. I'm sure that many of you who also love those books were nervous about this. I would say if you haven't read it yet, you don't really have to be nervous. Don't go in expecting huge things. Something that is both a blessing and a curse in this book is that Ellie, Magda and Nadine haven't changed much, but they're 40 now. So they're still doing the same thing. They're still doing and thinking the same things they were when they were 13, which is maybe problematic, a little realistic, but also not entirely, because people do change, and you would especially want them to change for the better in certain ways, and some of them are just stuck in this endless cycle of teenage thinking, which is kind of bizarre. But I still really enjoyed spending time with these characters again. Yes, there are lots of coincidences where characters from the series miraculously get together in a room so that you can see them again. I didn't mind that. Weirdly, there were a few errors in it that I don't understand, because I don't know why someone didn't catch them, either Jackie herself or an editor. The art teacher, Mr. Windsor from the original series, is in this, but in that series he was called Guy, and in this he's called Gary, so don't really know how that happened. And then there are a few slightly cringe moments where Jacqueline Wilson novels are referenced. So Ellie named her daughter Lottie because of her favourite book, The Lottie Project. And I don't know, I mean, if anyone can get away with that, Jackie can, but I wasn't sure how I felt about those instances. But to be honest, I think overall the book did what I wanted it to do and left me feeling happy. I read Evie Wyld's new novel, which is The Echoes, and I didn't love this as much as her previous book, The Bass Rock, which I also reread in 2024. This is doing so much in 200 pages, and I think just overall I felt rather depressed by it. It is a very depressing book, though there are some moments of humour in it, and I think I was more drawn to those moments, and that's just not the overall tone of the book. So I think just from a matchmaking point of view, we weren't meant to be. The narrator of this book is Max, who has just died, and you open with him realising that he's a ghost, and he's saying he didn't really believe in ghosts until he was one. I loved Max's parts so much. He was trying to get the cat in his flat to notice him. He's talking about his partner Hannah, who he's watching grieve him. And he was a creative writing lecturer, and he's laughing now about how he used to tell his students not to have a ghost as a narrator because they're in a fixed form, they can't change, and it means that you're setting out to fail in your story. So I really liked all the meta stuff to do with writing in this book. I thought that was brilliant. Hannah's section, where we're looking at the history of her family in Australia, I found myself not enjoying as much. And enjoying is an odd word to say because it's a very traumatic part of the novel. But maybe I just wasn't in the right headspace to be reading that. So this one, unfortunately, wasn't one of my favourites, and it was one of my most anticipated books, and I love so many of her other books, and will definitely read more of hers in the future. Then I also read My Good Bright Wolf by Sarah Moss. This is her memoir. Heavy trigger warnings for discussion of eating disorders in this. She is talking about the history of her family and her relationship with food. And then there's also a part which is discussing literary criticism and her relationships with books. Weirdly, the narrative voice in this sounded very much like Kirsty Logan to me. And I don't mean the person who narrated the audiobook, because I listened to this one on audio, but just the way that it was written reminded me of Kirsty Logan's writing. So if you're a fan of Kirsty, I think you would really, really enjoy this one. Then I read She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark, which is a collection of short stories. I've spoken about this already on the channel. I thought that it was a really well-balanced collection, some really humorous stuff, some really gory things as well. If you've read her writing before, you will know what to expect, and this one didn't disappoint. And I read The Forest Brims Over by Maro Ayase, which is translated from the Japanese by Hayden Trowell, which is a book that is a little similar to The Vegetarian by Han Kang because it's about a woman who turns into a forest. I didn't enjoy it as much as The Vegetarian though, and I found myself wanting to skim a lot in this book. It didn't always hold my entire attention. I really liked the parts where the husband was travelling into the forest of his wife, which sounds like a very weird sentence to say, and other characters also end up doing that. I really loved the magical, surreal feelings of that. That felt quite Spirited Away like, but the other stuff that was talking about writing women and feminism in Japan felt a little bit too on the nose for me, and I would have liked that to have been explored in perhaps a more subtle and nuanced way. A few picture books that I bought for myself and really loved. This is Poco and the Drum by Matthew Forsyth, which is about a frog whose parents buy them a drum for their birthday and then have very big regrets. The Grand Hotel of Feelings by Lydia Brankovich is the most wholesome thing about a girl who runs a hotel for feelings. She knows that sadness speaks in a very small voice and likes to sit in the bath a lot. She knows that anger needs to go in a big bedroom, not locked away somewhere small, so that it can really express itself and then feel better and then depart and move on. And I just think this is a great book for not really just discussing with kids the importance of feelings and expressing yourself and being heard, but a good reminder for all of us. I think that all feelings need to be accommodated because they are merely passing through. Little Witch Hazel by Phoebe Wall is a lovely graphic novel / long form picture book about little witch Hazel throughout the seasons and all the things she gets up to in the forest with her friends. I really love the illustrations in this. I think that they're very, very beautiful. Would recommend that one. Bought it for a couple of people for Christmas and they also very much enjoyed it. Another series of graphic novels / picture books that I read was Sato the Rabbit by Yuki Inoue. So this is the first one and then there are two others. There's one called The Moon and one called A Tea of Sea. These are palm of the hand Japanese stories, so flash fiction, where Sato the rabbit gets up to very surreal, beautiful things like turning the moon into a blanket and falling into a raspberry. We'll show you what the art style is like. The art looks like this. It's kind of like the Moomins meets the Little Prince, and if you want something that will give you the warm feelings that Kay O'Neill's books do, who wrote the Tea Dragon Society, then these ones will be right up your street. I'm gonna whiz through these final ones. As I said, I reread The Bass Rock by Evie Wilde and was again impressed by the intricacy of this book. There are 3 different time periods in this, but I particularly loved Ruth's section, which is set in the 1950s, and Vivian's section, which is set in the present day. And I remember when I first read it, I said that the present day section was a bit like Fleabag meets Ali Smith, and the 1950s section was a little like Sarah Waters, and I stand by that. It was more harrowing on a reread than I remembered it being, and that therefore makes the echoes make more sense to me. But I really enjoyed rereading this one, and I actually listened to it on audio this time around. The first time I read it in physical form. The second time I read it in audiobook. Then I read The Fortnight in September by R.C. Sheriff. Do you see how my face just suddenly lit up? I love this book so very much. Again, purchased it for a few people for Christmas. This is a Persephone book. It was written in the 1920s. It's about a family called the Stevens family who are getting ready to go on their annual 2-week holiday to Bonga Regis, and nothing much happens in this book, but it's about them prepping for the journey. I have never in my life read a book that more beautifully captures the minutiae of everyday life, the to-do lists of this family, the little anxieties that they have, their desperation for the trip to be just as perfect as it was last time, how they all enjoy spending time with each other but also are infuriated by each other as well. It's perfect. I loved it. I loved it. Then I reread the Out of Hitler Time trilogy by Judith Kerr, which is When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, Bombs on Aunt Daisy, which is what it's called now, but I have an old copy which for some reason used to be called The Other Way Round, and A Small Person Far Away. So When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is a book I read dozens and dozens of times when I was a child. It's based on Judith Kerr's own life about her fleeing the Nazis in the 1930s in Germany because her father was outspoken against Hitler, about them living in Switzerland, then Paris, and then settling in London. And then the sequel is about Anna living in London during the Blitz, and the third one is about her returning to Germany when she is an adult. Now, I have reread the first one so many times. The second two, I never revisited very much because I didn't particularly enjoy them when I read them as an 11-year-old. And I always thought that was because they weren't very good. But then I thought about it some more and realised these are when Anna, or Judith, is older. So it's probably because I didn't identify with her when I was younger. And actually, when I looked up these books last year, they say that they're for adults, they're not for kids, whereas the first one is for kids. So it is not surprising that I didn't enjoy them when I read them as a child. I'm pleased to say I reread them last year and really enjoyed that experience. When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is still my personal favourite, but I loved spending more time with Anna and her family. It made me so happy, and also was interesting because I have read The Tiger Who Came to Tea so many times in 2024, and this obviously is also by Judith Kerr, and it gave me a whole new appreciation for the book, rereading the Out of Hitler Time trilogy, because The Tiger Who Came to Tea is about a tiger who invites himself into Sophie and her mum's home, eats all their food, drinks all their, liquids, drinks all their tea, all of their milk, all the orange juice, all of Daddy's beer, and then all the water from the tap, so Sophie finds she can't even have her bath. And then when their dad gets home from work, they have to explain what's happened. And he says, I know what we'll do. We'll put on our coats and we'll go to a cafe, because they have nothing in the house at all. So they do that. They go down the road and it's dark and all the street lamps are lit and all the cars have their lights on. And they go to a cafe where they have a lovely supper of sausages and chips and ice cream. And I do know this book off by heart. And it was so interesting reading this again multiple times after reading When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit and its sequels, because this is Judith writing about a force coming into your house with a barbed, sharp smile, and you have to smile nicely back, otherwise they're going to attack you, and you just have to watch as they take all of your things and there's nothing that you can do about it. They leave you with nothing and then you have to rebuild over again. This is something that happens to Anna and her family many times over the course of her life. Firstly, the Nazis come into their house and they take everything, including her soft toy pink rabbit, and then multiple times over the course of her childhood specifically, she loses their family home, they have to relocate, she has to learn a new language, and each time she thinks she can't do it again and her family can't do it again because this tiger has come into their lives and has stolen everything. And their family, their parents, really want Anna and Max, the children, to feel as though they can still have something warm and cozy even if they don't have anything. So they will sacrifice a lot to be able to go to a cafe and have a cup of coffee and share an iced bun. And I just now get very emotional when I read this book, which is every single day because it's one of my daughter's favourite books. So yeah, I just thought I would share that too. Okay, we're nearly at the end. I read this zine by the lovely Holly Exley, who has a YouTube channel, who I'll link in the description box down below. This is about 2 summers that she has spent living in a van in Scotland, and I very much enjoyed it. I finished reading Monstrum by Lottie Mills, which is a short story collection with disability themes, which you do not find very often at all. If you like magical realism and you want to read more about disability, this one is for you. I read Flock by Gemma Kuman, which is about a girl called Sylvia who lives in a tree, very much keeps to herself, doesn't play with the other people who live in the tree, but then one day makes friends with a bird, and that kind of teaches her about community, and she thinks maybe she would like to have a few more friends. Then I read Edith's Diary by Patricia Highsmith. I don't think I like this one very much for several reasons. Firstly, it was a bit bizarre because I was reading it thinking, this is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, though obviously that came much, much later. But I couldn't get away from the fact that Lionel Shriver must have read this book because the tone was so similar, about a woman who is protecting her son who is clearly up to not great things. So that is a big element of this book. But I don't know how I felt about this book overall. Edith's character was very complicated. I really enjoy reading about morally ambiguous people, but it just made me deeply uncomfortable at times in a way that I'm not sure it intended to make. Was that a sentence? It made me feel deeply uncomfortable, and I'm not sure that that was in the way the author intended. So yeah, it made me feel a little bit icky, and it is not one I would particularly recommend. Patricia Highsmith is a very problematic person, and that doesn't seep into her work, at least none of the work that I've read before, but I feel like it did in this one, and I did not enjoy that, and I don't really know how I feel about it. Then I read 2 more John Wyndham books. I read The Kraken Wakes, which I didn't particularly love. I found it a little bit tiresome because it's told with a lot of almost found documents. So we've got newspaper articles in here, we've got radio, both radio that's been broadcasted, but also discussions on the radio between people on ships, for instance. It's about extraterrestrials going into the sea and then sinking ships. I thought the premise was actually quite camp and fun, but it just wasn't able to sustain itself for me. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but I did enjoy Stow Away to Mars, which is about a woman called Joan who stows away on this spaceship to Mars. It's about the space race, but it was written decades before the space race ever happened, and I love that about old school science fiction. This is a brilliant look at how a woman would be treated in a spaceship with men and no accountability, so that was really difficult to read, but I thought was handled really well. And as I mentioned before, what I love about John Wyndham's writing is that it is quite serious, but then also absurdist in many ways, which means you end up having quite a bit of fun with it. This is also about AI, which I found fascinating to read about, especially in this present moment. So if you would like to read an old science fiction book about space and AI, then get your mitts on that. I then read this beautiful picture book called Milo the Knight, which is about a ladybird who's really self-conscious, so he never wants to take off his armour. I did think that the illustrations were the most brilliant part of this book. It is illustrated by Charlotte Parent, and the text didn't quite live up to the beauty of the illustrations, but I will still enjoy revisiting this one, especially with my daughter when she is a little bit older. I then read When the Stammer Came to Stay by Maggie O'Farrell, who is obviously most well known for her books for adults, which I also enjoy, but this I thought was just gorgeous. It is about two sisters, one of whom develops a stammer, and they live in a house with lodgers, and it felt like I was reading a classic. It reminded me so much of Ballet Shoes by Noel Streatfeild, not because the premise is the same, maybe because of the lodgers, I don't know, but it felt as though I was stepping into a classic that I'd read before and loved, and that is definitely a compliment. You also don't see much writing, especially for kids, talking about stammers, and I thought that that was really refreshing, especially because this is written from an own voice's perspective, so I enjoyed that very much. And then finally, the last book I read in 2024 was Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo, which again was a reread. I revisited this one on audio, read it in physical form the first time. This is about Barrington, who's been in a relationship with his best friend Morris since they were teenagers in Antigua, and then they came over to the UK, but he's been married to a woman called Carmel and has not been honest with her about the affair that he's been having with Morris, though really he's been having an affair with Carmel because he was with Morris first. It's about him deciding whether or not he wants to come out to his family and live his remaining years with Morris because he's in his 70s now. The voice in this is the most joyful thing. Barrington is an iconic character that you will never forget. You also get to hear from Carmel's perspective as well, and I enjoyed that, but I especially enjoy spending time with Barrington. I know that there's recently been a BBC adaptation of this, which I look forward to watching at some point too. But yeah, this was a joy to revisit. Would highly recommend if you haven't read it already. So those are the books that I read and kept in 2024. I need to look at my phone and tell you about the ones briefly that I parted ways with, though I think because this video is going to be so long and these are books that I didn't particularly enjoy, I'm going to be super brief about it and maybe only cherry pick a couple to speak to you about. But my daughter has woken up again, so I'm now going to go and get her, and I will film the rest of this video later today or tomorrow, so see you in a second. Okay, it is day 3, it is nap 3. Can we finish this video today? I really hope so, because I would like to get it uploaded tomorrow, just Saturday as I'm filming this. It is so frosty outside today. It is 10:30 and it is still -4 outside, which for us is cold. I will insert some footage of the frost outside. I've also just realised my glasses are filthy, so let me quickly clean these. Okay, that will do. I have got Storygraph up on my phone and I'm going to screen record so that you can see what I'm looking at, so I don't have to insert individual covers onto the screen, save my editing self, because I've been editing this in the evenings as we've been going, because this is day 3 of filming. This video is already about an hour long, so let's try and keep the rest of this succinct. Okay, so on the screen you will be seeing me go through a list of all the books I read last year, and I'll quickly mention the ones that I haven't already talked about that aren't the books that I read for Inclusive Books for Children. Okay, so I read The High House by Jessie Greengrass, climate crisis novel, wanted to love this one, but really wanted more from it. The characters didn't feel definitive enough. They kind of bled together a bit, and that may have been the point, I'm not sure. but it just didn't stand out to me in the way I had wanted it to. Has anyone seen Charlotte Salter by Nikki French? This was good fun. I love Nikki French. They have a new book coming out soon, which I will be reading, I think next week actually. But this one really reminded me of one of their first books, which is called The Memory Game. I mean, they've published, what, like 30 books, so that kind of thing is going to happen, and that distracted me during the reading process. Then, what is next? Cut to the Bone by Alex Kahn. This may have been the worst book that I read last year. It was about a YouTuber who goes missing. So that was the premise that made me want to read it, because I thought, well, that's quite fun. But I didn't really feel as though the author knew much about YouTube and about how that all works, and that was very distracting. I also found the characters so over the top, so hyperbolic, and some of the situations were just ridiculous. So yeah, not my cup of tea, that one. Never mind, we move on. Then, Judas Horse by Linda LaPlante, which is the second book, I think, in the Jack War series. Yes, it is. It says number 2 here, by Linda LaPlante. I've given up on this series now. Again, just too over the top for me, and I couldn't get over all the tropey things within it. So we'll not be revisiting that series. This is a Miko Jiu copy by Natsuko Imamura. Is this translated by Polly Barton? I don't have it in front of me, and it doesn't say right here. This is one of the Pushkin novella series, Japanese novella series. I did not love this one. I didn't not enjoy it either. It was just a bit forgetful for me, which is not what one wants to feel about a book, really. They, by Kay Dick, is one of the Faber editions, which are republished forgotten classics, and it's a dystopian, and it's a little bit like High Rise by J.G. Ballard, about a group of rich people who've bought apartments in this building for the end of the world, for the apocalypse, and people who don't have money are always trying to get into their apartment. But it's not as good as High Rise by J.G. Ballard, so I didn't end up really loving that one either. Dee Dee's Umbrella by Hwang Young-jun, which is translated from the Korean by Emily Ye-won, if I'm remembering that correctly, is 2 novellas about non-binary people in Seoul, and it's kind of a combination of 2 of her books that I've read before, 1,000 Shadows or 100 Shadows, and I'll Go On, and I definitely preferred her novel I'll Go On. So if you want a recommendation, read that one. That one is about found family and queerness. Then I read The Dream Home by T.M. Logan. This one I listened to on audio, brilliantly narrated by Richard Armitage. I was like, wait, no, is it Simon Armitage? No, that's somebody else. Richard Armitage. I really enjoyed the narration. T.M. Logan is someone that I've gone to as a new Nikki French type writer. Sadly, the first book of his that I read, The Curfew, is my favourite that I've read, and all the others that I've read since haven't really lived up to that, and this was also the case, and I guess the twist in this one too. Fragile Animals by Genevieve Jagger is a book about a vampire, kind of, yes, and it is set on the Isle of Bute, and I had hoped it was going to be a little bit like Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens and Woman Eating by Claire Coda, this new surge of slightly supernatural literary fiction, but I just didn't get on with it very well, unfortunately. What else do we have? Lots of books that I have already spoken about. That may be the last one that I have parted ways with, actually, because when we get towards the end of the year, I kept them even if I didn't enjoy them hugely, because I knew I was going to be filming this video soon. So I don't think I have. That's it. Those are all the ones that I had to talk to you about. Okay, I said that you had sent me questions about my 2024 reading. However, I have spoken about all the books that I read, and I don't think that you need me in this epically long video to repeat myself. So thank you very much for your questions, but I think I'll just cherry pick the ones that will allow me to talk about books I haven't actually spoken about yet. And you may think, Jen, how can you possibly do that? Because you just said you spoke about all the books that you read. Well, there were 2 questions, actually 3. One of them was, what is the best book on disability that you read last year? And I am in the middle of this, so I haven't finished it yet, haven't therefore spoken about it yet, but this is We've Got This, Essays by Disabled Parents, edited by Eliza Hull. And this is, I mean, as it says, a series of essays by disabled parents. and I am finding this very comforting. I am really enjoying this, and I'm taking my time with it. I started reading it, I think, in the summer, so I will read it over the course of however many months, just picking it up here and there. So if that is something you would like to read about, then I would recommend that one. There was a question of also any other books that I haven't finished yet that I'm carrying over into 2025. There were a few that I kind of dipped into. I dipped into Ray Antrobus's new poetry collection, Signs Music, and a few other ones besides, but there are 3 short story collections that I would say I am actively reading, or want to be actively reading, that I'm carrying over into 2025. So we've got Elsewhere by Yan Gi, which is her debut, English language debut, a collection of short stories. She is the author of Strange Beasts of China, which was one of my favourite books a couple of years ago. Come Let Us Sing Anyway by Leonie Ross. I fell in love so hard with the first story in this. It reminded me quite a lot of Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. So if you're looking for something similar, I recommend this. And then the first story in this one stressed me out so much. This is Briefly While They Still Have Horses by Jan Carson. The first story in this is about a woman who goes to a beach every day. It's a secluded beach and no one else seems to know about it. She's really annoyed when she goes there one day and there's a couple and a young baby, and she feels as though she's been robbed of her secret space. So when their baby starts crawling towards the sea and they don't notice, she doesn't say anything. I was so stressed. Then there was also a question of were there any 2024 releases that I really wanted to get to last year and didn't end up getting to? And the answer is, oh, so many. But to shout out just a few, we've got Bia Get Out of Banjo's Adam, which is a poetry collection that came out in the summer. We've got Max Porter's new book, All This Unreal Time. We've got Glyph by Ali Smith, which I didn't get around to reading. And Hum by Helen Phillips, which is a new desperately creepy book that I want to get to because I loved her book The Need. In my defence, all of these, apart from Adam, came out towards the very end of the year, so I haven't had much time to get to them. That is my defence, and I am sticking to it. Finally, recommendations very quickly of TV shows and films that we watched in 2024. We didn't watch many TV shows, but there were 4 I wanted to give a shout out to, and to be honest, I don't think any of them are that obscure. But you know, these were our favourites. We loved Race Across the World. I think it's actually my favourite TV show. It is about pairs of people who are sent to travel from one place to another. So in the most recent series, it was from somewhere in Japan to somewhere in Indonesia for the price of the plane ticket between those 2 places, but they're not allowed to use air travel. They don't have any phones. They have to get there on foot, by train, by car, however they can, and it's just so much fun. I love the most recent series the most, I think, actually, out of all of the series, and the celebrity series are also good as well, and I don't always enjoy celebrity editions of TV shows, but for this it works. Day of the Jackal, definitely the most popular TV show just before Christmas, with Eddie Redmayne and Lashana Lynch, about an MI6 agent who is trying to track down a sniper who is Eddie Redmayne. I just thought it was a lot of fun, and the ending was not what I was expecting at all, and I respected that. The TV show Slow Horses on Apple TV with Gary Oldman. I mean, it's been going a while. I know it's a series of books. I haven't read the books. Would you recommend the books? Disgraced MI5 agents this time who are working in a place called Slough House and trying to redeem themselves. Gary Oldman's character is just outrageous and I enjoy it. And Squid Game 2, which came out just after Christmas, and I was sure would be pretty terrible. I just didn't know how they were going to make a second series after the success of the first one about people who are in lots of debt who go into a series of games, not televised, but just games for rich people where they can die, and if they don't die, at the end they'll get a lot of money. And yeah, I just didn't know how they were going to continue with it because it had an ending that didn't have an easy follow-on to it. I thought the second series was better than the first series. I respected that so much because I think that is so difficult. And I will tell you though, I thought that the 7 episodes were going to be part 1 of the series and they'd release part 2 maybe next month, how Netflix like to do to make you pay for 2 months subscription. And I was not impressed when I realised that that was the end of season 2 and we're not going to get season 3 until maybe later this year. It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. So, but I mean, I'm only so annoyed because I loved it so much. I thought it was brilliant. Then films, very briefly, I would like to give a massive shout out to my pal Mercedes. She also has a Booktube channel. Her channel is Mercy's Bookish Musings. She is the queen of independent cinema. And in the summer, I said to her, Mercedes, Mr. M and I really would like to watch some short independent films. So films that are between an hour and a half, roughly. Can you please send me some recommendations, because we have very similar taste. She sent me a banger of a list and we have been working our way through it. Here are my top 5 recommendations. So Tangerine, which is about transgender sex workers. It's a film by the person who made The Florida Project, which I'd already seen, and I now need to watch everything else that they have made. It is a comedy drama. It is so funny and also so hard-hitting in places. Brilliant. Black Bear, which stars Aubrey Plaza, is about a filmmaker who goes on retreat to write a film, and then you see that film play out, but then you're not sure which bit is her life and which bit is the film, and it gets really messy and meta, and I thought that that was really brilliant. Perfect Days, one of my favourite films ever, about a man who works in Tokyo cleaning toilets, and it's just about him finding joy in his everyday life, and then a family member comes into his life again to disrupt that a bit. I thought it was so beautiful. Shiver Baby is a comedy that's only an hour long. It's about a woman who I think is in her very early 20s who goes to a shiver, meets the man that she's having an affair with, and he doesn't know how old she is, and she didn't know that he's married, and his wife is also at this shiver, and they have to have this really uncomfortable interaction. They can't get away from each other, and it's all set at this wake, and I love that kind of thing. It's like how I love dinner party novels. It's that vibe, and you just get to observe from the sidelines. And then finally, The Father, with Olivia Colman and Anthony Hopkins, is an adaptation of a play about a man who has dementia, and his daughter is trying to persuade him that he needs to go into a home. And the scenery and the characters are so simple, and you can tell that it is a play because of that. But the way that the scenery and the actors work means that it reflects the way the father is feeling as his memory fades. It makes you feel as though your memory is playing tricks on you without wanting to give spoilers. I thought that was so clever and ultimately so heartbreaking. So those are the 5 films that I would recommend to you, or I would say Mercedes also recommends to you on top of other films that she recommended. That has a double stamp of approval. Okay, so we've reached the end of this video, definitely over an hour long. If you're still here, thank you. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you're new to my channel and you would like to subscribe, that would be wonderful. If you enjoy the content that I put out and you would like to consider throwing $1 or £1 in the tip jar over on Patreon, I would massively appreciate that. The support that I receive over on Patreon allows me to keep creating free content over here, and there are some extra things over there like a book club and other things. There is also all of the Vlogmas videos that I made in December. If you would like to go back and watch those, you're very welcome to do so. I am going to love you and leave you, and I will see you for another video very, very soon. Bye.